What is going on, Notre Dame football fans? Mike Singer, Jack Soble, and Tyler Horka back on the Blue and Gold YouTube channel for another Notre Dame six-pack show. Really appreciate you guys for tuning in. My voice is coming back. I think by tomorrow night's show with Eric Hansen, it'll be fully back. But good thing I don't do a whole lot of talking for this show. Anyways, folks, please do hit the thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to the channel for more content. Change the game with Rhoback, a proud partner of Blue and Gold. Get the best fit and best feel with their incredibly comfortable activewear. From polos and quarter zips to shorts and Delta performance pants, you will look good and feel good with Rhoback. If you own Rhoback, you just know Rhoback's the best. I was wearing Rhoback out at a friend's get together the other night, and it was like, yeah, I was wearing my Rhoback. I was wearing the Shamrock ones. It's not on here, but it's like their St. Patrick's Day line, and I was getting compliments. And my buddy was like, yeah, man, I try to wear Rhoback as much as I can. So use promo code BlueGold20 for 20% off your first purchase over at Rhoback.com. Boys, I do trust that you're well, so we'll go ahead and dive into today's show. And our first topic is Josh Pate put out his top 25. Let me pull it up as well, because he did. I can't pop it up on the screen, but he did include Notre Dame on that. And he actually had Notre Dame at number 1. He had Miami at 6, BYU 14, and SMU 20. Talking about some Notre Dame opponents. So Notre Dame at number 1, boys. Notre Dame's been listed high on some of these, but I don't think I've seen any other credible, outlet put, just talking about Pate, put Notre Dame at number 1. So Horka, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, on that last note, I was a little busy when it made its way to our message board, but did Greg McElroy also have Notre Dame number 1? I know he's really high on the Irish.
I don't know if he dropped. He said like they might be preseason number 1, but I don't know if he dropped a formal top 25. I think the highest I've seen them ranked besides this was Sports Illustrated had them at number 2. That was Brian Fisher.
Yeah, so obviously with Pate putting them at number 1, I like that he justifies these things. And I mean, everyone does when you release this stuff these days. You can find so many different videos of the talking heads out there saying this is my top 25 and this is why it's my top 25. But I'm on board with Pate when he says what's not to like about Notre Dame this season. The head coach is a check, with it being his 5th season. Marcus Freeman has figured out things, really gotten better every year. He also points out that like Notre Dame did everything it needed to last year, minus winning those 2 big games, but you still have to circle back to how close Notre Dame was in those 2 games. It's not like Notre Dame didn't show up against Miami and Texas A&M, lost to 2 college football playoff teams by a combined total of 4 points. So the head coach is back. The quarterback is back. Like Notre Dame was a top 10 team in all of these things, these way too early top 25s last year, and then subsequently into the actual polls right before the season started. And the quarterback was a question mark because CJ Carr had never started a college football game. Now he's started 12. Now he's at the top of the Heisman Trophy odds for 2026, and rightfully so, if you ask me. I think he's one of the 3 to 5, maybe even top 2, maybe even number 1 quarterback in the country coming back. Like, he is that good. He's with his offensive coordinator, the same guy that kind of brought him along last year in Mike Denbrock. Notre Dame returns its defensive coordinator in Chris Ash. So up and down the list, you're asking yourself, is there a hole here? Is there a problem area there? The answer is usually no with Notre Dame, and I think that Josh Pate has every reason to rank Notre Dame number 1.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd rank them number 1. I definitely consider it. I don't know who I'd rank number 1 right now, mostly because there's a reason these things are called way too early, and also I don't think there's an obvious preseason number 1 this year, unless, like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, but I don't think any other team stands out as like, oh, they're definitely better than Notre Dame. I definitely understand this more than I understand Notre Dame being put at like between 7 and 9. I've said there was one that had them at 12, but that was stupid. But I saw a couple that had them between like 7 and 9. I really don't get that, to be honest. Like for all the reasons you said, plus like, yes, head coach is coming back. Yes, the quarterback's coming back. What excites me most is how much production they got returning on defense. There's no reason for them not to be a top 5 unit there. I especially don't understand like Notre Dame being between 7 and 9 or something like that, and then someone like Texas in the top 5. I think Notre Dame should be in the top 5 for the same reason Texas should be in the top 5, in that returning quarterback, team was playing its best football towards the end of last year. did really well in the transfer portal. Texas made more headlines than transfer portal for obvious reasons. They got Cam Coleman, who I think was the consensus number one player in the portal. But I don't get someone like them being ranked that much higher than Notre Dame, because I think those two teams are appealing for a lot of the same reasons.
Yeah, Notre Dame is unequivocally a top 5 team going into next year, if you ask me. So if you have them in that 7 to 9 range, you're wrong. If you had them at 12, like you said, that was dumb and really wrong. But getting back to another point that you made, I don't see any team that I point at and I'm like, okay, that team is clearly number one. Thought Ohio State was probably that last year, even though I think Texas ended up being number one. That was Arch Manning overhype for sure.
I remember it being 1 Texas, 2 Penn State, which was obviously in hindsight stupid, and Ohio State 3.
I thought Ohio State honestly probably deserved to be number one. So with that being said, this will probably change. Like maybe Notre Dame drops down in Josh Pate's rankings eventually, but putting them at number one, they're not going to drop out of his top 5. And I think that's correct. Like they'll probably stay in the top 3. Speaking of the top 3, I don't like that Indiana's probably going to have one hell of a chip on its shoulder. Like Kirk Cignetti is looking at these lists most likely going, we just won it all. We were the first team to go 16-0. Nobody could beat us. Who's going to beat us next year? If I'm Kirk Cignetti, that's what I'm saying. And it's not like he's looking for reasons to be like, oh, man, nobody respects us. I think everybody respects Indiana. But I guarantee you he's probably asking himself and his guys, hey, why not us again? I think we're going to run this thing back. So I'm getting a little worried that Indiana's just going to go full juggernaut mode again.
Well, they're not number one in a lot of these polls for the same reason Ohio State wasn't number one last year, in that, like, yeah, they had some pieces coming back, but they had to replace the quarterback. They had to replace most of the defense, including both coordinators. Turns out the defensive coordinator is probably going to win the Broyles. The defense had a bunch of players who were better than they had before, and the quarterback was definitely better than they had before. So it just goes to show you that you never know. Could that happen for Indiana? Who knows? But they certainly did well enough in the portal to make a real run at it again next year. So again, the conclusion here is that, like, could you rank Notre Dame number one? Sure. I think there are probably 5 or so teams you could rank number one as well.
It's also probably more difficult to go back to back now than it ever has been.
Oh, 100%.
Team era, like it's an absolute gauntlet. And Jack, you pointed it out today. National championship's not going to be played till January 25th next year, right? Like it takes a lot to get there back to back, especially win it back to back.
Yeah, awfully nice of the college football playoff to take the thing everyone agreed was an issue, which is that it's too long, and make it substantially worse.
So it looks like Notre Dame is closing in on a new defensive backs coach, and Aaron Henry, who was the Illinois defensive coordinator for the past few seasons, goes way back with Chris Ash, played for Wisconsin under Ash, worked with him on his first staff at Rutgers. So, these two guys are very familiar. So Henry taking a step back in a sense, but he also could add co-defensive coordinator to his title, which I would think is more of a money thing than anything. But so, yeah, what do you guys think about this potential hire? Go to Jack first. Aaron Henry from Immokalee, Florida.
Very strong hire, I think. Not knowing much about him personally, but his resume at Illinois, I think he was probably a step back as a defensive coordinator. I think that's probably a reason that he chose to leave that job for a position coach job. But as a defensive backs coach, the last time he held that role in 2022, Illinois randomly had the best defense in the country, and they led the country in pretty much every relevant pass defense stat. 24 interceptions. The next highest team had 20. They were the best pass defense in the country the last time he led that secondary. So obviously a feather in his cap there. A few NFL defensive backs he's developed. 4, could be 5 if Xavier Scott from Illinois gets drafted next year. But the two most notable ones are Kirby Joseph, who was an all-pro safety in 2024 with the Lions, 9 interceptions that year. Devon Witherspoon, who was nothing as a recruit. He had a whole bunch of group of 5 offers, and then Illinois took him. I don't think Aaron Henry recruited him at Illinois, but Aaron Henry very much developed him at Illinois into the number 5 pick in the draft and one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL today, who is leading the Seahawks to the Super Bowl this week. So very impressive resume at Illinois as a DB's coach. I don't think Notre Dame could have done much better here.
Yeah, you're talking about this guy like he's 50 years old or something with all of these accolades in his resume. It's pretty awesome that he's only 37. And if you go back to his playing career, as Mike mentioned, was at Wisconsin under Chris Ash, who was coaching there at the time. He was first team All Big Ten in 2011. Before that, he was second team All Big Ten. So he's not too far removed, like a decade and a half, going on 2 decades from doing this at a really high level. And I think we've seen with Marcus Freeman and some of these other coaches that Notre Dame has had in the Freeman era, it means something to be so relatable to the players. And I think he's going to do a good job with that. And then the experience also speaks for itself. Like he's been a lot of places. Arkansas as a graduate assistant to begin his career. We mentioned Rutgers under Chris Ash 10 years ago, NC State, Vanderbilt, and then that long stint at Illinois. I think that's probably the most important, not just because it's the most recent, but when you go from defensive backs coach to being elevated to defensive coordinator, like you've done something well and you've kind of put yourself in a position where the guys you're working for are like, yeah, this is the guy that we want. So Notre Dame is getting someone that has really progressed in his 10 years as a coach.
I want to jump in before Jack goes, and Jack, you can talk about this. So he played both corner and safety collegiately, and he's coached both as well. So I think that's a pretty good replacement for Mickens, who coached both for the Fighting Irish.
Right, absolutely. I also like the coordinator experience. I think that that's important. Even if he wasn't too successful as a coordinator, that experience matters. On a staff where your position coaches are limited, you want as much of that diverse experience as you can get. So I think that's a big point that's appealing to me for Chris Henry as defensive backs coach. Looking at other points in his resume, the connection to Chris Ash, I think it's significant that Notre Dame is giving Ash so much leeway to rebuild the defensive staff at this point when all 3 incumbent assistants left. Charlie Partridge was his roommate at Drake in college. Aaron Henry, there's an obvious connection there. Not really connection, I don't think, with the linebackers coach that they're targeting. We'll get to that in a second. But I think a significant part of this hire is the trust that Notre Dame's placing in Chris Ash.
Yeah, because I think when Chris Ash came in, there was a little bit of questioning the direction that Notre Dame's defense would take. I think too many people just assumed that it was going to be an ain't broke, don't fix it, just kind of do what Al Golden did situation. Yeah, maybe that was true. Like when we were speaking in February of last year when he was hired, that all made sense for 2025 because the situation was what it was. You could just kind of take what Golden had left you and try to get through 2025 with that. Turned out like Chris Ash was trying to put more of his stamps on that 2025 defense, and he eventually did, and it worked. And Notre Dame was playing really good defensively down the stretch of last season. And then, hindsight's 2020, but it's easier now to remind ourselves that Chris Ash was always going to have to put even bigger stamps on the Notre Dame defense, and he's doing that now with some of these hires of guys that he trusts, guys that he's worked with, and guys that he's really close to in this sphere. So I think it's all coming together in a good way for Notre Dame in that regard. And it should make Marcus Freeman feel good about the direction of Notre Dame's defense, because there was a time, we can go back to September, when people thought that he was going to have to take over this entire thing. I think that was a little bit premature to freak out like that, whether it was me or anyone in the chat or whatever. But now we're starting to realize, okay, Chris Ash has a pretty good grip on this thing. And with each hire that he makes, he might be even taking more of a stranglehold on Notre Dame's defense. And that's what you want your DC to do.
One last note on Henry individually. I think we might have talked about this when we talked about the Mickens leaving, but the majority of the work for development for the 2026 roster is done. Like Leonard Moore's a developed player. Adon Schuler and to some extent even Tate Johnson, he's obviously got room to grow, but he took a huge leap last year. Like those are developed players. Maybe he can help Christian Gray refine his technique and become the player Notre Dame knows he can be. But a lot of the heavy lifting development wise for this season is done. He can focus a lot. Aaron Henry can focus a lot of his attention on guys like Joey O'Brien and Kari Adams and Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden and Ethan Long, the guys who will take over once the main contributors from 2026 are gone.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about Notre Dame's new linebackers coach, who doesn't seem to have any connections to Marcus Freeman or Chris Ash that we know about, which is, Freeman's had hires that it's like, okay, this is obviously from his Cincinnati days, like a Denbrock or Al Washington, Gino Guidugli, Mike Brown. And then there's guys like Jaywan Side or Chris Ash, like guys that maybe didn't work with. I don't think he worked with Ash. this is one of those hires. So Brian Jean-Marie, who is more under the Charlie Strong coaching tree, from Texas and USF. Man, how many times we mentioned Texas on this show? It's seriously, and Tyler hasn't even done it yet.
I haven't done it.
And obviously Louisville, and Brian Jean-Marie was at Michigan for a few years. Was looking like he's going to be hired by Georgia Tech. That never got finalized, and looks like Notre Dame's scooping him up. So neither of these hires at the time we were recording this live with you guys is not official, but it does look like Notre Dame is going to be hiring both Aaron Henry and, again, Brian Jean-Marie as a new linebackers coach. So, Tyler, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you see the big M logo there in most of the pictures that you get when you Google the guy, and some Notre Dame fans will be like, "Oh, no, not a Michigan man." But look, when you're talking about Michigan in the last couple of seasons, toward the top of the Big Ten, won the national championship a few seasons ago. Obviously, he wasn't there yet. He was at Tennessee at that time, but he was at Michigan in 2020. So while Michigan was kind of building toward that national championship caliber team, he was there. And then it's another thing when you think about what we were talking about with Aaron Henry is like, this is a 50-year-old, so he does have the experience, but over the last 2.5 decades, he's been to a lot of different places. I mean, you're talking about Louisville, you mentioned Texas, Mike, South Florida, Michigan, Tennessee, so Georgia Tech, who he was looking at going back to. But that's another thing that you can talk about with this hire is, Notre Dame has a little bit of pulling power right now when it comes to hiring people. It's like, all right, you can stay where you're at or you can look elsewhere. But when Notre Dame comes calling, I think that's right now a bigger deal than it was maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. So Marcus Freeman has this thing rolling to a point where, yeah, you can be at a spot like Michigan in the Big Ten, big conference money, all of those different things. But when Notre Dame comes calling, Aaron Henry wanted to go. And now Jean-Marie wants to go. And I think that's a big deal. And that's something that needs to be talked about with these coaching hires.
Looking at his resume, obviously a lot of decent stops there. In terms of development, the Michigan linebacker core was very deep this year. A few other NFL guys in his past. He developed Jordan Hicks at Texas. I think that's probably his most significant resume point. I was actually kind of surprised to see the reaction to this on our message board. I guess some fans who stalk the Michigan board day and night saw that Michigan fans weren't too big on Jean-Marie, which was interesting to me because I feel like Michigan's linebackers were pretty good the past couple years. I guess maybe the concern seemed to be recruiting, but here's what I will say about it. And I'm not judging this hire on its surface based on the reactions of his previous fan base whatsoever. But if you're concerned, if you see Michigan fans react to this like that, and you're concerned about linebacker recruiting, Notre Dame is never going to have an issue recruiting linebackers as long as Marcus Freeman is the head coach here, or coaching linebackers for that matter. I don't want to downplay the significance of this job, but this is probably the least important position on Notre Dame's staff as long as Marcus Freeman is here. Not just for recruiting, but for development, because Marcus Freeman spends an inordinate amount of time in that linebacker position group. Like I remember talking to Jack Kaiser. I think it was at the national championship or the Orange Bowl or something. About Marcus Freeman and his recent extension, and he's like, yeah, it still feels like he's our position coach because of all the time he spends in individual drills and coaching the linebackers, teaching them. So I think this is a good hire, but honestly, like as long as Marcus Freeman's here, it's Notre Dame could hire you, Tyler, and then they'd be fine.
Yeah, to that last point, I think. And maybe Mike will step in and tell me this is all a bunch of hullabaloo and completely off base and just plain wrong. But I think position, and unless you're just touted as one of the best when it comes to recruiting as a position coach, like, I don't know, Brian Hartline bringing in wide receivers, or maybe there's a quarterbacks coach out
Mike
there.
Mickens and defensive backs.
Mike Mickens and defensive backs. I think it's a little overrated when you look at position coaches, and it's like we're like you're saying, Jack, we're never going to get good linebackers because we don't have this guy as the linebackers coach, or we're never going to get good wide receivers because this guy's all it takes is a little bit of momentum. It takes a head coach that wants to recruit, it takes a defensive coordinator who's on the same page as the head coach. And it's kind of like a tree on down the line, right? To where, yeah, you would like your linebackers coach to be world renowned for recruiting and this guy's never going to miss, but it doesn't mean you can't hit because John Marie is your linebackers coach. Like to your point, Jack, I think Notre Dame's going to be fine on the recruiting aspect. The development aspect, I think, since Notre Dame is still positioning itself as a team that wants to recruit and develop as opposed to just pull this guy from the portal and, all 2 or 3 of our starting linebackers are going to be from the portal. That's not Notre Dame. So the development aspect is still paramount. And if this coach can develop, then I think it's going to be fine. Because like you said, Jack, you're still going to get the recruits because Notre Dame just had the number 2 recruiting class in the country for a reason. The recruiting is going to be fine. If the development is good, then Notre Dame is going to be good. And that's just the way that I see it.
I think that there are also examples on the extreme opposite end of recruiting, like a Dell Alexander at Notre Dame with wide receivers. But from everything, what?
No, it was just bad, Dell Alexander. Yeah.
Yeah, Dell Alexander's bad, but I think the overall operation was also bad, and that kind of fed into it. Like Marcus Freeman has the operation humming at the top level.
From everything I've seen, I think our Tyler James did some research on this. Like Jean Marie's recruiting resume is pretty good as far as the solid college linebackers. I don't know if there, besides Jordan Hicks, there were any high-end NFL guys that jumped off the page, but it all seems solid. He seems to have solid linebacker rooms, and the best judgment you can make about a coach is based off the people who know him or have covered him before. And Mike, you said that you know someone who's covered Jean Marie extensively in the past, and they had good things to say about him.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. My 2 thoughts on this are: one, are we really just going to be like, all right, well, if the Michigan fans said this, then that is where I'm drawing the line. Like that's where I'm getting my thoughts on this is based on Michigan fans. Like, are we kidding? And the other thing is, like, Marcus Freeman has been pretty damn good at hiring coaches. His first hire at Notre Dame was when he was the DC, and he hired some graduate assistant or analyst or something, a guy named Chris O'Leary. Yeah, now he's the Chargers defensive coordinator a few years later. Like, Freeman has hired really good coaches, and he's not gonna, he's working with Ash on these, and they're not gonna hire someone they don't think is gonna do a good job. So,
and that's especially true, Mike. Sorry to cut you off again with the linebacker position. Like if Marcus Freeman thinks someone can coach linebackers, that person can probably coach linebackers.
Let's stick with the coaching talk. So we have defensive line coach Charlie Partridge, assuming Brian Jean-Marie, linebackers coach, and Aaron Henry, the defensive backs coach, Marty Biaggi helping out as well. But, he's being linked to potential moves elsewhere. So we'll see if Notre Dame's special teams coach and assistant safeties coach is still here for this upcoming season. So I don't know, guys, like it's a whole new defensive staff for Notre Dame outside of course, Chris Ash, the defensive coordinator. So is this a big deal for continuity? Is it not? Like, I'm assuming you guys are going to say it's not a big deal, but what is a big deal? Like this can't be absolutely nothing. I mean, you're losing some really good coaches. So what do you guys think? We'll start with Jack.
I don't think it's nothing, but I think in terms of like year-to-year continuity and overall defensive performance, I think the coordinator is probably a bigger deal. Like I think it was a big deal that Notre Dame had a new defense coordinator in its first 2 games last season. Obviously, the first 2 games are a different situation this season. They don't have their toughest 2 games at the beginning, so just because of that, it won't be as big of an issue as it was last year. As far as like, could they be issues in an individual position level? Again, I don't think so, because again, a lot of the players are already very well established. So even if I think Notre Dame hit on all these hires, but even if they didn't, like, it won't show up until next season.
Yeah, the biggest thing is losing Mike Mickens, but you knew that was going to happen at some point anyway. So it's not like you can brace for that because you're not going to look for a replacement before you lose the guy, but it was always in the back of your mind, okay, we're probably going to lose this guy. So that stinks, but you still get to work with the really, if you look at Notre Dame's number 2 overall recruiting class, a big reason why it's so highly rated is because Kari Adams and Joey O'Brien and just the wealth of riches that Notre Dame's bringing in defensive backs wise. So long, Mike Mickens, but thank you for that, basically, is what you're looking at there. And then, Chris Ash is going into his second season, and the coaches are always going to tell you that the players are the most important thing. And we're talking about a Notre Dame defense that is bringing back most of the guys that made it what it was last year during a 10-game winning streak. So if you're talking about Chris Ash and these guys learning from Chris Ash, understanding the system, going out there in year 2 of the system, assuming that it's probably going to look even better than it did for 10 games in 2025, I'm not too worried about the fact that Notre Dame has, 3 new coaching hires on the defensive side. And here's another one that I wrote about this in a column late last week for blueandgold.com. It's kind of crazy how it worked out to where Max Bola left. And that's another big loss that we need to highlight here, because I think that guy is a superstar in the making if he isn't one already. So that's a big loss, but Notre Dame moves Al Washington to linebackers coach temporarily. Of course, end up losing Al Washington to the NFL. But that subtle move there, moving Al Washington from defensive line to linebackers, enabled Chris Ash to say, you know what, Charlie Partridge is going to be our guy to coach the defensive line. And in an alternate universe, Notre Dame sticks with Al Washington at defensive line and hires a linebackers coach and goes on its way. But Charlie Partridge, everything I read about him, hear about him, excellent coach, has done it at both levels, big-time hire for Notre Dame. And it's just kind of funny the way that things work out sometimes, because that whole little switcheroo, you end up losing Washington, but you get Charlie Partridge in the process. And I think Notre Dame's coaching staff is really, really good for that.
I'm also not so convinced, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't really have any intel on this, but I'm not convinced it wasn't like it wasn't, we moved Washington to linebackers coach, let's see what defensive line coach we can get. It's, there's an opening on the coaching staff, we can go get Charlie Partridge. Hey, Al, do you want to coach the linebackers? Regardless, they got Charlie Partridge in.
I think it was a little bit of both. I think Washington wanted that move to advance his career, which obviously worked out pretty quickly. And you could get Ash's best friend in there.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Tyler, that Charlie Partridge is the piece of this that would excite me the most. I think followed by Henry as defensive backs coach. Jean-Marie, by all accounts, is a good coach, but again, like you or I could coach linebackers, and it wouldn't make Kingston Viliamosa, Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, and Jalen Sneed bad players. So for this year, as far as continuity is concerned, they're going to be fine. As far as the linebackers, you do worry a little bit about it. Like what if all those guys leaves? Then you're going to need to develop like the Teddy Rizaks and Thomas Davis Juniors and Ko Kias of the world. So that's a conversation for 2027. But as far as 2026, like I don't see much of a concern about continuity like you did with the coordinator change last year.
On the topic of developing the linebackers, I look at losing Bola the same way that I look at losing Mickens, in that he was destined to leave, and it's his alma mater. He takes on the co-defensive coordinator title, that was happening. So nothing you can do about it. But to your larger point, you're going to have to hope that the guy you bring in is capable of developing linebackers, because you're losing a lot after this season. I actually just did our linebackers preview for the next Blue and Gold Illustrated magazine that's coming out next month. And in the sense that it's so awesome that you have every single main contributor, all 4 of the guys that you just mentioned back from last season, you likely have 0 of them in 2027. Osbury is the only one of them that has a year of eligibility that you think he would do. Like, I think that KVA, if he stays healthy and has a really good year, probably goes to the league. Now, he might come back for his senior season and says, okay, I can do a little bit even more to elevate draft stock. But right now, after his junior year, I think he's an NFL player already.
Folks, please hit the thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to the channel for more content if you have not done so yet. Eric Hansen wrote an article looking at Marcus Freeman's coaching tree, so to speak, guys that worked for him at Notre Dame and what they've gone on to do. I'm just going to list some of the notable ones. Mike Mickens, obviously now with the Ravens as their defensive backs coach. Chris O'Leary going from safeties coach now to the Chargers defensive coordinator, retained Tommy Rees. He's now the Falcons offensive coordinator. Al Golden, Bengals DC, Brian Mason, Colts special teams coordinator, Dylan McCullough, Vegas Raiders running backs coach, might go to the Chiefs. Jared Parker, much maligned Jared Parker, Troy head coach, Al Washington Dolphins linebackers coach. I mean, Max Bulla and James Laurinaitis were grad assistants and linebacker, and now Laurinaitis is the linebackers coach at Ohio State, and Bulla the co-DC and linebackers coach at Michigan State. The list just goes on and on. So it's impressive what he's done in a few years as a first-time head coach, to now have these assistants go on and do great things. There's not many on the list where you're like, oh, that one just didn't work out. I think, Chancey Stuckey, being the Marshall, he took a couple years off from coaching, it looks like, and he's the Marshall wide receivers coach. And then I think that's really it when you look at the hires that he's made.
I believe, sorry to cut you off, Mike, I think Stuckey so far is the only Freeman hire that he's ever had to fire.
That sounds right.
No one else comes to mind there.
Well, we'll stick with you, Jack. Thoughts on this coaching tree?
The most important trait a head coach can have, in my opinion, is the ability to not just identify good assistant coaches, but to continue identifying good assistant coaches over and over and over again. Because if you hire a good position coach, they are not going to be there for very long. Mike Mickens overstayed at however long you thought he was going to stay. He stayed longer. 6 years is an eternity for a position coach in Big Bad 2026. So to do this over and over again, like Marcus Freeman has proven the ability to do, number one, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt with any new hires, including the three that we've talked about today. But number two, it makes Notre Dame all that more appealing as a destination for coaches. Like, hey, X amount of our former assistants have gone into the NFL. You want to go to your college coach who wants to go to the NFL. This is the place to do it.
Yeah, on that last point, I mean, just the list of guys that he hired, and some of them bounce back and forth. Like Al Golden was in the NFL. Freeman hires him. He goes back. Dylan McCullough, same type of deal. But he's hired upward or right around a handful of guys who are now coaching in the NFL. This isn't talking about the guys who he inherited who are now in the NFL. Like Tommy Rees, for example, I see him in the comments. Marcus Freeman took him on. He didn't have to hire Tommy Rees. Had to get him to stay, which is a big thing. And that speaks to your point as well, Jack. Like he's getting guys to stay with him at Notre Dame. This isn't just about hiring, but it's also about getting Mike Mickens to stay for as long as he did. Or I look at Al Golden, it's like he could have just stayed in the NFL. Dylan McCullough could have just stayed in the NFL, but there was something about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman himself that was appealing enough to get those guys to have their little stint back in college coaching. And then, okay, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go back off to the NFL. And that was probably hard decisions for them. And it just in the sense that it's becoming a hard decision for Marcus Freeman himself to not know if he wants to go to the NFL or not. Like there's a whole other world out there. And the world that we're living in here at Notre Dame sets you up for that. Like that's pretty impressive for all of these guys that are on the list. Go to blueandgold.com and read Eric Hansen's work, but so many of them that are in the NFL. Al Washington being one of the latest. I mentioned Mike Mickens, Chris O'Leary that was mentioned earlier. He's now a defensive coordinator. Like these are all guys who got there in part because they worked for Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. And that's pretty impressive for a guy that just turned 40 years old not too long ago and is pretty new at this head coaching thing himself. So the coaching tree is only going to get more profound for Marcus Freeman as he goes along. And by the way, Mike mentioned Jared Parker. He had a winning season at Troy, so much maligned and all that. But last season, they won more games than they lost, and that has not been easy to do at Troy of late. So if you work for Marcus Freeman, good things probably happen for you in your coaching career down the line.
Yeah, good for Parker because Troy was in the Sun Belt Championship, I believe. James Madison was the best team in that conference, but that was a really nice bounce back season for him after a rough year one. Yeah, I don't know what more I would have to add to this. I'm curious to see what some of these guys do in the future. I think Al Washington is a future head coach. Al Golden, rough year one in Cincinnati, but that was more personnel than anything else. I think Cincinnati probably just made a mistake firing their previous defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. Golden's work was not his fault this year. Other guys who I could see moving on to bigger and better things. Of course, Max Bulla, rising star in coaching. Al Washington, I think is going to be a head coach one day. Mike Mickens, I think, would be a great defensive coordinator at some point. Obviously, it didn't work out that way at Notre Dame, but down the line, just going through the list here a little bit. Chris O'Leary is someone who I don't think we've talked enough about. Mike mentioned him as Freeman's first hire as defensive coordinator. Like, his rise has been rapid. 1 year as Notre Dame position coach, Los Angeles Chartered position coach, Western Michigan defensive coordinator, then NFL defensive coordinator back with the Chargers. I talked about how identifying good assistants over and over again is the most important skill a head coach can have. That's Jim Harbaugh's best skill, and why he's been a big reason why he's been so successful throughout his career. He's won everywhere. Has been clearly sees the same things in O'Leary that Marcus Freeman did. So I'm excited to see where his career goes from here as well.
This is venturing down a little bit different of a path because this guy's career is getting close to the end, but I think it's also impressive that someone like Mike Denbrock, with everything that he's done in coaching, said, you know what, I want to go back to Notre Dame, and specifically I want to work for this guy because I think it is going to work out. And now he's a couple years into this, and I think Notre Dame fans are very, very happy that he chose to come back, and you have to give Freeman credit for that too, because LSU is what it is now, and the whole head coaching change there, but you didn't know that was going to be the case at the end of 2023, I believe it was, when Freeman literally had to pull Denbrock away from a situation where he just coached a Heisman Trophy winner, and you get all the offensive recruits in the world that you want at LSU, but Freeman's like, hey, come run it back here and we can do great things, and sure enough, that's what's happening for Notre Dame offensively.
Malachi Fields, what a stock up performance he had at the Senior Bowl. Jack, like before the Senior Bowl, I don't know, what was he being talked about? Third, fourth round, something like that. Could he go in the first round, the Notre Dame wide receiver, of course, transferred from Virginia?
I mean, we've seen Senior Bowl hype reach that point. It feels like there's a run on wide receivers every year in the late first. So, like, I don't think I would necessarily take Malachi Fields in the first round. I could see that happening after his performance down in Mobile because he was pretty dang fantastic. I think before the Senior Bowl, he was probably late day 2, early day 3 at the latest. I think his projection has moved up to early to mid day 2 at this point. Like, from everything that I've seen and people I've talked to who saw him down in Mobile, it wasn't like the contested catches are one thing. Contested catches alone don't get you drafted very high. It's just too hard to do that consistently and make that an efficient play in the NFL. Do you know, like, in the past 20-something years, there is exactly one player who has made the goal line fade an efficient play, and it's Calvin Johnson. Like that's how inefficient contested catches can be in the NFL. That's why you saw someone who's as good at contested catches as anyone in Malachi Fields be like a late day 2, early day 3 guy. In Mobile, he showed that he's got the movement skills to be much more than that. And if he can catch some in-breakers, some of those stop routes we saw him do at Notre Dame, but not a ton because CJ Carr loved Jordan Faison on the other side with those. If he can run some slants, run some deep posts like we saw him catch at Notre Dame and be in Mobile a little bit, can kind of be like a do-it-all guy, as well as those contested catches that, like, again, while it's inefficient, it's not a lost art by any stretch in the NFL. There's still a place for big boundary guys in the league. So all that he showed at the Senior Bowl is really raising his stock right now.
It seems like there's always wide receivers in the NFL where you see them just go off on Sunday and you're trying to remember what they did in college ball. And you're like, why don't I remember this guy? It's because not every wide receiver in the NFL has to be the guy from Ohio State that was catching passes from Heisman Trophy caliber quarterbacks, or Alabama, Oklahoma. You think of these high-powered offenses. If you look at Malachi Fields' college career, he was catching passes from God knows who at Virginia. I think we watched Fields a couple years ago when they came into the Cavaliers came into South Bend and they had, like, quite frankly, Drew Pine level of quarterbacks throwing to Malachi Fields. Was it Anthony Calandria, a couple of other, like, they played like 3 quarterbacks in that game, Jack, and none of them were CJ Carr, right, is what I'm saying, or none of them were the people at Ohio State or Alabama or whatever. All of that to say, you don't have to have the world's greatest college statistics to get noticed by NFL scouts, to see what you can do on a football field. And I think this speaks to everything that you've ever believed in, Jack, that stats aren't everything. At some point, you just have to evaluate the player, what he's capable of, what he might be capable of in the NFL, and go from there. And tying this all together with the Senior Bowl, you see that catch that he made downfield, the route that he ran to get open like that, the way that he repositioned himself to make that catch, and he was doing all the other little things that you mentioned, Jack, and running some of these other routes. I don't know if that's a first-round NFL pick. I'll probably say it's not, but he definitely increased his draft stock, and that's awesome to see because he's a really, really phenomenal football player.
I think to some extent, like, the way he was used in Notre Dame's offense did him a little bit of a disservice that I think an event like the Senior Bowl can cover up. And I'm not saying that to criticize Mike Denbrock or Marcus Freeman or CJ Carr by any stretch. It's just that Notre Dame had 3, even 4, if you count Jeremiah Love, high-volume pass catchers for him to compete with. They all did a bunch of different things to the point where they could say, like, all right, Malachi, you can hang out on the boundary, catch some contested balls, run a deep post once every 4 games. Like, they really didn't use him in a lot of those ways that you saw him run routes in some of those one-on-ones in Mobile. So that's why a showcase like this was so important for him. You look at the way he moves. Like, I was talking to Max Chadwick with PFF, someone whose work we've used in the past. He's one of PFF's main college football analysts. He said, like, this guy's moving like someone who's 5'11", 6 foot at 6'4". And I mean, you've seen what Malachi looks like without pads on. Like, the dude's a tank. So if he can move like that at that size, there's always a place for him in the NFL. I do think his stock is a little bit scheme dependent. Like, you see a lot of those, like, Shanahan McVay type schemes who favor little more versatile, like between 6 foot and 6'2" wide outs, because they run so many condensed formations that they basically need everyone to be a capable slot receiver. But if you got a system that utilizes a big boundary guy a little bit more, Malachi Fields is your guy. I think he's somebody you target on early on day 2.
Yeah, I think his ceiling is like DK Metcalf type player, where he gets knocked because he doesn't run a lot of routes, right? But the ones that he runs, he gets open and he makes the contested catch. If there's a spot for a guy like that in your offense, and a lot of offenses have a spot for a guy like that, then yeah, he's going to do great things in the NFL. And Jordan Faison obviously was CJ Carr's number 1 target last year, but the efficiency of what Malachi Fields did, 36 catches, 630 yards, that's 17.5 yards per catch, ranked 2nd on the team in touchdowns with 5. So an offense that was predicated on running the ball, had a Heisman Trophy finalist running back. For a boundary receiver to put forth those numbers in 12 games, dude can do some things for you, and I think he is going to do that in the NFL as well.
Folks, thank you so much for watching this week's Notre Dame 6-pack. For just tuning in, rewind, watch from the beginning of the show. Talked about some good stuff that you're not going to want to miss. Please do hit the thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to the Blue and Gold YouTube channel for more content. Our next show will be Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be live with Eric Hansen, and we'll talk about some of similar topics and more in that show. So please tune in tomorrow night, and make sure you lock into blueandgold.com for so much more written Notre Dame football and recruiting coverage. Again, thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you next time.